everyone for joining. This is a really great turnout, and we're excited to have assembled this panel of OTel Collector practitioners. So one of the missions of the OTel and User Working Group is to collect feedback on OTel to deliver back to the SIGs. And I think this started because Juraj, who works in the OTel Collector SIG, he reached out to us to put together a survey to collect some information on the OTel Collector to see how it's being used to sort of drive what the roadmap and vision is going to be for the collector in the next little while. And then we thought, well, let's extend this and also have a panel and have a nice lively discussion with a handful of OTel Collector practitioners. So here we are. So why don't we introduce the panelists? I'll introduce myself first. My name is Adriana Villela. I work with Reese and Dan in the OTel and User Working Group. Our groups our numbers are getting a little bit bigger, so I'm very excited to see that. Yeah, so we're hosting this event. Let's go over to our panelists. I'm gonna pick names. Eales, how about you go first?
Hello, everyone. My name is Eales. I'm a senior observability engineer at Miro, and I've been working with OpenTelemetry for a little bit more than a year now in 2 companies. So I have a lot of experience and use cases that I worked because my 2 experiences are completely different from each other. And I'm happy to be here. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Juraj. Did I pronounce that correctly? Please correct me if
So, hi, my name is Juraj Michálek. I'm based in Madrid, currently working very recently for a company called Svizzeri in the, I guess, insurance space. And before I worked for like 2 different companies where we used in the last one, in the older one, OTel very sparingly, and in the previous one, we basically fully migrated to OpenTelemetry for collection of logs, metrics, and traces. And I'm a senior logging and monitoring engineer in the current role.
Awesome, thanks. Next we have Greg.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
My name's Greg Eales. I work for Ocado Technology, which started out as an online supermarket and now sells online supermarket technology to other supermarkets. We've been using the collector for a bit over a year, my team, but I've only been on the team for a bit less than a year. Yep.
Awesome. And finally, we have Joel.
Hi, I'm Joel. I'm from a company called Open Systems. We're based in Switzerland, but we have a presence sort of, let's say, globally. We have offices in San Francisco, actually. I've never been there. Also in, I think, London and Germany. So those are where we're based. But we offer managed SASE, so managed connectivity and VPN for our customers. And I'm on the observability team. So I'm responsible for making sure that we get telemetry from our devices, which we have 10,000 of all across the world. And also we're now having to deal with data coming from Kubernetes. So, Prometheus metrics, logs, all this nice telemetry, which we need to handle. We've been using the collector since about a year now. I think just under a year. I would say probably April last year was when we started. And we're really we really decided very quickly that we want to fully migrate everything to it, because at the moment we kind of have a big mass of different service teams doing things in their own way. So we're kind of consolidating everything now. And we found that the collector and OpenTelemetry in general was a very nice way which we could do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, all of you, for joining us. So let us get into the questions. First things first, and we'll start, let's start in the order in which folks were introduced. So Eales, how about you start with telling us how you and your team are primarily using the collector?
Okay, so I could talk a little bit about how we're using it now and in my previous company as well, since I am very new at my current position. But we are using the collector mostly in my current company, mostly as a transport layer at the moment. We already migrated traces. We're in the process of migrating logging and metrics. In my previous company, we were a bit more advanced than that. We were using the collector itself and the operator. Currently, we are only using it as a deployment. Basically, all it's doing is transporting from our legacy components, and we're slowly moving to collect everything through OpenTelemetry Collector. And in the past, we actually used the presets a lot, the presets that are offered by the collector itself. So we were running it as a daemon set, and the collectors were collecting everything, especially in our Kubernetes cluster. So that is the goal right now, to have the collector take as much of the collecting of the information as possible and get rid of the legacy ones like Jaeger, for example, or Prometheus.
Awesome. Same question, Juraj, please. How is it that you and your company are using the collector?
So in my current role, which I just joined this month, they're just starting with OpenTelemetry and traces in general. But in my previous role, we basically, it was a SaaS startup where early on there was some concern about the cost. So one of the things we started to work on was migrating from vendors' proprietary collection pipeline and client libraries to OpenTelemetry, which then enabled us to do a POC of other alternatives, where we basically just use the concept of the pipelines to take the data we were already gathering and just send it to a different vendor, and also a self-hosted solution. It was mostly, we ended up settling on the self-hosted solution, which was basically the Grafana looks good to me stack, self-hosted in Kubernetes. The way we run OpenTelemetry, there was a couple of modes. There was the typical Kubernetes deployment where we had the daemon set for collecting logs, metrics, and traces from everything running on the nodes. There was a couple of stateful sets. One was for dedicated to collecting Kubernetes related metadata, and there are a couple of different stateful sets for pulling data from AWS CloudWatch. We also had deployed it as sidecars to various things still running in ECS, which were being migrated to Kubernetes. And then we also had a couple of OTel collector deployments with ingresses for either ingesting the data from the sidecars in the ECS into Kubernetes, or we even had sort of there was a hybrid mode of our product where you would the execution layer would run in customers' VPCs. This was written in Java and had the Java agent instrument included in, and that would also send back metrics and traces to our ingress, behind which we had the OpenTelemetry deployment. And then in front of the looks good to me stack, we had another layer of OpenTelemetry collectors to do some unified transformation to ensure some labels were common, things like that.
Awesome. And how about you, Greg?
So we use the collector for traces. We had a sort of legacy kind of trace-like thing called Request Viewer, which was based on logs, which was very heavy. And we're migrating now everybody. I think we've just started to delete the cluster for the old Request Viewer. So now everybody should be sending traces via the collector. We do some processing, do some sanitization, add some attributes, and do tail sampling as well so that we can sample by whole traces. We don't do anything with metrics apart from our own metrics. So we gather the metrics from the collector and forward them, Prometheus remote write them out to Grafana. We use Grafana Cloud as the backend for all the telemetry. We deploy it in ECS, not Kubernetes. And that's kind of been interesting. And we have one central cluster. We don't have a sidecar. We have one central cluster that scales in and out with load of the collector.
Okay, interesting. I definitely have some follow-up questions on that, which we'll save that for a little bit later. And then finally, Joel.
So we have collectors deployed all over the place. We've run collectors on all of our hosts. They are kind of egress gateways for telemetry. Primarily, the data which we're shipping is actually fully, well, not fully, but it's mainly log data. We have pipelines enabled for metrics and traces, but currently it's just the collector's own metrics which we ship. And there's very few applications which are using traces at the moment. So primarily we're using it as a kind of log telemetry mesh. And we're using that as a way to sort of lay the groundwork for the full migration in the future. So we have the, let's say, the egress collectors running on our hosts. We have an ingress collector running in our central Kubernetes cluster. And then we have multiple layers of collectors behind that. So we have a routing collector, and then we have a collector which is specific for each backend which we're interested in. So for example, for Loki, for Thanos, and for Tempo. Those are the main backends which we're shipping to at the moment. We self-host everything. And the reason we've done it like that is to sort of try and keep the configuration overhead simple, because those pipelines can get quite complicated when you try and stuff everything into one collector. So we have this sort of egress and ingress concept. And the goal really that we have is we're trying to ensure that all telemetry in the future will have a uniform set of labels of metadata attached to it. So we're starting with logs, and then we're going to roll that out also to metrics and traces in the future, that you can really actually start to correlate between signals in the backends. We also, if I can quickly say, we also do some custom processing. So we actually build our own collector. And so some of our teams, for example, have built processors which do things to proxy logs, for example. We have proxy logs which come through and they need special processing. So it's been quite well adopted also by the service teams when they see the power of building a custom processor.
Awesome. That's great. Next question is, are you, so starting with Eales, are you using a vanilla collector contrib, or a custom built one, vendor distro? Like what
we're using, sorry. Yeah, we're using the vanilla one. So far, we haven't had the need to use any custom that is already not there. Nothing new, or a vendor one. We're currently fully open source. So yeah, the vanilla one worked great in our case.
So I'm assuming that's like collector contrib as is kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, we have our own configurations internally, but yeah, it's the same, the base image.
Okay, perfect. Same question, Juraj.
I honestly do wonder if anybody's actually running the not the contrib one, because the main one just does only OTLP, and I think that's kind of like, I have seen very few workloads that produce OTLP and can also ingest OTLP on the other side. Anyway, we use a variety. We have multiple custom distributions built. One of the reasons behind that is being, for example, the OTel collectors that are sort of exposed to the internet. We wanted to minimize, well, first of all, we wanted to minimize the size of the binary, but also minimize the number of components, just to have the only necessary ones, even from security perspective, especially around exposing it to internet. We had another special distribution which contained the Go debugger, in case we needed to debug some issues, where there was, for example, issue with the Datadog exporter, which was not exporting properly certain labels and logs, things like that. And all of it is based on the upstream OpenTelemetry Collector contrib with just custom configuration.
And so I'm assuming, though, since you talk about having a collector with just the things that you need with the reduced binary, I'm assuming then use the builder then to build out.
And we have a Renovate bot to submit pull requests with updates. We also had some I mean, we also contributed a bit back to OTel Collector, so we also used it so we could test changes before they were merged, changes on processors and other components before they were merged into upstream.
Awesome. And since you did, so since you've done contributions back to the collector and since you've used the collector builder, what have your experiences been around both of these things? I guess let's start with like, has the OTel collector builder, like, did you find it a useful, intuitive tool to use when you were building your own distribution?
Yeah, I think the one, like, once we got the initial configuration going, then it's really easy to, that's why we have like 6 or 7 different builds, because it's just you copy paste the config once, edit it a bit, remove, add what you need, and then just run the builds in parallel basically, and just give them different names. And it was also quite easy to then just point at like your fork of a specific processor to test it. So you can so we can test things even before they get merged. Also with the one thing, I think the bit where there's the like replaces at the bottom, that's something we ran into a couple of times where we needed to update that because the builds broke, but that was just looking at what the upstream was doing and updating that with that information. Yeah, it's pretty. So the second question was around the contribution process, or?
Yeah. How did you find the contribution process to be?
I think it's okay. Like it's kind of sort of nice that things get, because of the pretty frequent releases, you don't have to wait that long for your changes to go live after you merged. There's I think there's decent documentation around like how you can contribute, like things around like how to format your code, things like that. And I think there's overall a pretty timely response to like well-written issues where they tell you like, oh yeah, that's cool. Like if you have time, you can contribute and fix a certain thing. So that was overall. The only like slight frustration I found was at times it can take a bit for like there's a label on the pull request which is like ready to merge, and even after that gets assigned, it can take like up to like week or 2 for somebody to finally merge it, which can be frustrating because then like the pipeline starts failing because something broke upstream and somebody merged upstream into the branch and it broke the pipeline. Like there's things like that. But other than that, it feels pretty good.
All right, great. Thank you. Next, Greg, what collector distribution do you use? Do you use Contrib? Do you build your own? Use a
So
vendor?
we build our own. We use the builder. We forked the Contrib repo and based off that. So we do that because, well, initially we had a feature that we needed, which was to add ECS, AWS Cloud Map service discovery to the load balancer exporter, so we could get a list of targets for the load balancer. So we forked that, did that locally, and we've actually contributed that back, or there's an open pull request at the moment that's taken quite a long time. It still hasn't been merged. But I think it's getting there. I think it's near now. But that's been quite slow. And then we've discovered quite a few either missing features or bugs. So it's been quite nice to both be able to debug the code locally and actually step through and find out, is this how it's supposed to work? And also then to be able to go and fix it. Although we've had about 5 or 6 different bugs that we've got to the point of almost fixing them. And then we've seen that it's been fixed in the upstream repo. Somebody else has worked on it and has parachuted in and has fixed it, which is obviously nicer because, you know, they presumably are doing it better than us. None of us are Go developers, where I'm got a Java background and we have various other sort of developer backgrounds, but nobody's a Go developer. So we're kind of a bit nervous about contributing and a bit nervous about making changes and quite slow about that as well. But it's been a very good opportunity to learn more about Go.
Awesome. And then same question around the builder. How did you find your experience in using the collector builder to build your own distros?
The builder's fine, no complaints. It's quite, I mean, as I'm new to the Go ecosystem, or I don't really know how any other Go large project works, but it seems to work quite well. My one complaint, maybe, is it about the builder or about the repo? There's like 2 or 3 components in the core project, right? Not the contrib, like the OTLP receiver, the batch processor, the memory limiter. And I've been wanting to work on those, and it's really painful that they are not in the contrib repo. It's really painful to be able to like make changes to them and get them even running locally. I don't even know how I'd managed to build another distribution of the main thing, and I don't know how that would work. But like, so with the builder, you just do the replace and point it to your local directory. So as long as the component is in that repo that we're building from, it works fine. Yeah, but for these other components, I would be much happier if they were in the contrib, because it would make my life much simpler.
Okay, that's definitely a good piece of information. We'll be sure to pass that on. And then finally, Joel.
So we are running our custom build. The reason is actually because we have, like I mentioned, service teams who built their own processes. That was actually one of the big draws for why we should adopt OpenTelemetry. So that has been pretty very, very well adopted, I would say. We use the builder. It was not a problem to get it running in our build pipelines. Very, very good experience there. It's always quite fun. I think Juraj mentioned there's quite a fast release cadence, which is a good thing. But it's very easy to let a few versions slip by. And when you're maintaining your own distro, sometimes you get some nasty surprises when, if you were to just build and deploy, some config was deprecated or completely removed without, you have to chase down those errors and be very kind of on guard, even when you do a prod deployment and you've checked everything in dev. It's always a little bit on your mind, hey, something could have changed, which is going to blindside me. But I mean, that's just kind of, it comes with the territory, because a lot of the processes and modules that we're using are in alpha or beta stability level. I think it's kind of expected, and it's one of the sort of things we're happy to pay for with the flexibility of the solution. So this is good. Yeah, but overall, really, really positive experience.
Awesome. Next question, starting with Eales. What's the biggest challenge or challenges that you've faced with the collector? And it can be stuff like deployment, configuration, monitoring it, debugging it, or
debugging for sure. Yeah, I think deploying it is pretty straightforward, but debugging, I had a situation recently. It's kind of embarrassing to say now after finding out what the issue was. It was the first time that I was actually using the collector with the ingress, enabling the ingress. Usually it was all taken care of inside the Kubernetes cluster. And of course, having to pass the right paths. And yeah, I kept sending spans to try and see if it's going to work, but nothing. I just got an error message and nothing else. I tried something else, just not an error, but like a status code, and that's it. And it took me and my coworker more than 2 days to figure out that what the issue was, because yeah, we tried to enable debug logs, the debug exporter, everything, but there was just not enough information for this. And in general, it has happened like this. After a lot of time spent, we figured it out, but yeah, it could have been a bit easier for us.
what did you end up doing for like troubleshooting? Did you have to like go deep into code, or?
Yeah, deep in the code, and it's at this point it became like a brainstorming session. Everything that we ever knew about IT, we're like, okay, this could be this, could be this, could be this, could be that, and we finally got to it after a long time. But yeah, checking the code definitely helped, and then we realized, okay, you actually need the path in the receiver itself to explicitly add it. yeah, that's why I say that after it's been solved, it looks like such a silly thing, but at the moment of debugging, it can get pretty overwhelming.
And now, did you have like a Go background for to aid in the troubleshooting, or like what?
I didn't work with Go before actually working with OpenTelemetry, but now I'm learning. That's the thing. OpenTelemetry and debugging and checking everything has become my experience in learning Go, and I'm also learning independently. So yeah, it was a good excuse.
Oh, that's great. Juraj, how about you? What's your biggest challenge that you faced around the collector?
I think when we ran into a couple of bugs, it was kind of hard to debug because like they were sort of like happening only with large loads of data at times. So that's when we ended up having to build our own distribution to deploy with the Go debugger attached to it in like at least a decently used dev environment to actually see, okay, why is this happening? And then we only figured out, oh, this is like a bug in the like Datadog exporter, for example, where like it was not doing something properly. And I think then like if you have a bit more complex pipeline, especially if you manipulate a lot with like the resource attributes, things like that, it's kind of hard to test locally, or even like when you make changes to that, you basically just sort of need to roll it out to some lower environment and see if it works properly. But then if you have some of your own local testing environment, probably don't have that much data going through it, and it's probably maybe slightly different than what like the actual business applications produce. So I mean, it might be nice to be to have some sort of capability to test that bit better without having to actually deploy to like full blown environments. And then like there were a lot of breaking changes at times, so always need to be careful, read through the changelog before rolling out things. And in the later stages of the migration, we had an incident, for example, where we stopped sending some data to Datadog, or like some of the labels changed, and we didn't code it in the lower environments because we were no longer sending those to Datadog. So we realized that in production, and then like SRE teams started to like scream at us like, "Where's the data? Where's the data? Oh, this label changed. Why did it change?" Yeah, so things like that. Yeah. I mean,
sorry,
like
go ahead.
one other thing we ended up doing was, because we had multiple sources of the data going, like different types of OTel collectors doing different type of things, we ended up attaching a label to all the metrics, logs, and traces coming through it, basically telling us like which OTel collector type it came from. So like daemon set for the daemon set, something like Kubernetes for the one that collected Kubernetes metrics, and then like we had like internal/external ingest, which was for some of it. The internal was for ECS, the external was for metrics and traces coming from the external customers, just so we could easily track down, okay, where is this data even coming from?
Right. And just out of curiosity, so you mentioned like debugging issues in the collector also was a pain point for you. Do you have a Go background?
A bit. I'm not really a software engineer. I'm on the ops side, but I have been using things like Prometheus and Kubernetes for years before adapting OpenTelemetry, so a bit.
Gotcha. Okay. Same question, Greg.
I mean, our biggest challenge has been like the quality of the platform we're providing to the rest of the organization, especially kind of coming from this other system, which kind of worked, to rolling out the collector and maybe our configuration being wrong, or maybe there being bugs or whatever, for whatever reason, traces and spans not being available in the back end when our users were looking for them. And us having gone out and said, hey, this is the future, this is the great new technology, it's much better than this thing we made in-house. For them, their actual experience of them going and looking for the request that they were trying to debug, and it's not there. That probably initially was just naivety on our part. Like, we didn't know how to monitor the collector properly. We didn't know at which point along the pipeline from the trace or the span being created in the application to it arriving in Grafana, in Tempo, where we should be looking. And I think we've improved on that, but there are still kind of areas of doubt. And we've got a couple of things which we're struggling to know how, in principle, we can even monitor it, or how we should do it. And it just doesn't seem to be possible at the moment. So that would be our kind of biggest thing that's caused us anxiety. And the second thing would be there's just the sort of bugs or the things not working as expected in the collector. And I joined the team a little bit later. I'm a bit more senior than some of the other people. And I think when they adopted it, they kind of drank the Kool-Aid. They thought, this is great, it's going to work, it's going to solve all of our problems. And for a long time, they were struggling, thinking that they were doing something wrong. Whereas as I'm a bit more senior, I'm very cynical. I'm like, oh, there's probably rubbish code. Let's go and have a look at like the code. Oh, look, it doesn't work. You know, they didn't like think to ask those sorts of questions. But, you know, once you've been around for a while, you realize that all code is rubbish code and everything's got a bug somewhere. Yeah, so some examples of that service graph. At the moment, retry. There's, I don't know if you're aware, but I think the gRPC receiver will now return a retry code, but the HTTP receiver, OTLP receiver, will not return a proper retryable code. It will just return a server, a 500, no matter what it is, whereas a transient error should be like a 503 or something, so the client retry. So we turned on retries in the agent, and we're like, hey, everything's going to retry. We're not going to lose these spans anymore. And like, we're still losing them. What's going on? And it's just not implemented in the collector, right? Retryable transient errors. So stuff like that, it's like, oh, right, okay, don't assume that it works. We've just switched from using the open census metrics, internal metrics, to the sort of native OTLP or whatever you would call it. And that all seemed great, but then some of them have disappeared for the tail sampler, because the tail sampler has not yet been migrated to OTLP and it's only publishing open census metrics, which is fine. And we'll probably be quite happy to go and fix that because it's quite easy and submit a pull request for it. But it's just like somebody spent a week thinking that they've done something wrong, right? And actually like, oh, it's just not there. Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, you mentioned like, yeah, you could submit a pull request to fix it. Have you like submitted any issues around these items that you've identified?
So it's a similar story to earlier, that like I'm maybe not as good as my job as I should be. So what I do is I go and try and mess around with the code and fix it. And then I go and see if there's an open issue. And then I find out there is an open issue and somebody's already working on it, and I should have been doing something else with my time. So pretty much, yeah, everything that we've seen so far. There was one other thing. We used the count connector, and that produces like a stream of delta data points, and we needed to export them to a Prometheus remote write. So I actually created a like a delta to cumulative processor and opened up an issue for that and got sponsored. But then somebody else had the same issue and now they're working on it. I haven't had time to actually, mine was very much a proof of concept, and we've got it running in production and it works, but it's like, it only meets our very particular use case. It's not like a generic, and it's probably written wrong and everything, right? So yeah, we opened up that issue and yeah, it got some attention. So that's how it should work. We're happy with that.
Awesome. That's great. And finally, Joel.
It's really interesting you mentioned that. That was going to be my my point that I was going to make, is that I think the handling of cumulative metrics is really missing. So that's something which we kind of miss. We're very sort of Prometheus focused. So all of our metrics are in Thanos. We want to ship them through, which I think is working. But for example, like we ran into exactly the same issue with the count connector, and we just figured, yeah, that's going to be easy. Just plug it in, and Bob's your uncle. You can ship that to Prometheus, and it didn't work like that. And it was sort of, once you're so deep into the topic, you kind of know, yeah, sure, that's not going to work. But you have to get quite deep into it to get to that point of understanding, which I think was disappointing to our users when we turned around and said to them, yeah, by the way, that solution we proposed last week definitely isn't going to work. We need to wait on some upstream development to go on there. So I would say, yeah, that's the hardest part at the moment actually is planning how we're going to bring metrics into our sort of unified pipeline. Because at the moment it's just a tricky part. We also have a sort of outstanding use case, I would say, which is a generic. I mean, we have, like I mentioned, a lot of logs, so we're very logs based at the moment, kind of very old school. We're trying to change it internally, but that takes a long time. So we have like a lot of use cases where we want to build metrics out of logs, and currently there's no general way to do that in the collector. We're actually working on that as a sort of internal use case currently, so to build like a logs to metrics connector. But there's a few sort of, let's say, functionalities I would have expected to be there which aren't there yet, which yeah, it's also very good to see. I mean, I see Dan is here. Dan is sponsoring, I think, the cumulative to delta or delta to cumulative processor. So it's very good to see that the the community is working on it upstream. It just can be a surprise sometimes when you think, for sure, that feature must be there, when actually, oh no, you can't generate metrics in the collector and remote write them to Prometheus. That's not there yet. Yeah, so a few surprises like that. Basically, that's let's say the hardest thing. You can never be too sure when you're talking to other teams in your organization that what you're promising is actually achievable until you sort of dive in and get your hands messy with the code.
All right, well, thank you. All right, next question. What's kind of it on your for Eales, what's on your collector wish list as like something you'd like to see, feature improvement?
I am looking forward for profiling. I've been following it as a project, and I've seen some groundbreaking things, and I'm really looking forward to it. The collector, honestly, so far in both my experiences working with it, has been very complete, and it has worked very well for us. We really didn't need to have custom builds because it had everything. So now, since we are talking about the good stuff, profiling is the next big thing, and I'm really looking forward to it. I saw that there was a version 2 model already merged yesterday. So yeah, it's going to be great.
Awesome. Juraj, how about you?
I'm looking forward to seeing bigger potential, like the Apache Arrow project getting more ready to use, because there were some very promising improvements around reducing the network usage when the data is being transported. And then like I have just like to-do list of things that need fixing. Like we found a silent way you can lose data is, for example, with metrics, at least the Java agent basically sends them like once per minute, regardless of like how many metrics you have. So it's basically ever growing with the number of metrics you have until you hit like the max size of a gRPC message. And unless you collect the logs of the collector, which you might not want to do if you use the OTel collector to collect the logs, because you can get like a feedback loop because of that with issues. You won't see in any of the metrics that you're dropping data, because it's dropped in the gRPC layer, so it doesn't get to the part where metrics are implemented. So there's things like OTel to OTel. gRPC is basically unusable in Kubernetes right now, because even when you configure it to do client-side load balancing, it doesn't periodically refresh the targets. So it basically will keep using the first set of targets it discovered until like all of them are gone. So if you have any auto scaling there, it will not pick up the new pods, things like that. So potentially maybe getting to a point when there's with the new releases very frequently, I think it's a double-edged sword. Like it's great that things are moving quickly, but then it's also like lot to keep upgrading. Otherwise, you will get behind, and then you have like 10, 15 versions to upgrade by, and that can be quite challenging. Yeah, and then like maybe overall, it's kind of like mixed. Like there's some compatibility issues with the Prometheus ecosystem, and that sort of feels like a missed opportunity there, because it didn't have to be that way. Like if the like with the, for example, the cumulative versus deltas, I think that it comes down to like the OpenTelemetry project decided to support both, and now they have to deal with a lot of the complexities of like some things produce delta, something produce cumulative lift. If it just picked one, it would be a lot simpler to support things like that, I guess. And then especially I think around the receivers for things like, you know, in Prometheus you have quite nice ecosystem of exporters, and I guess that like in the OTel collector you have receivers that are sort of trying to mirror that. But I think the maturity of them is nowhere near the Prometheus ecosystem. Like that is also feels like a missed opportunity. Like why not just reuse the existing ecosystem?
So does
Instead,
that... Sorry, go ahead.
Instead, like as far as I understand it, we're basically re-implementing very much similar things the Prometheus ecosystem already did, just in a slightly different way.
So as a follow-up to that, do you see does that mean that you're having to still do things in Prometheus that you would have liked to have shifted to OpenTelemetry, or is something altogether different?
Like it's some of the trade-offs we took. Like there's compared to CubeState metrics, there's still some missing data. For example, there's no metric which would tell you what was the reason for your container restart, which I think is kind of important. With the container metrics, there's like the CPU throttling is completely missing. So things like that, like you can live with them, but it also feels like you know, like if they're like, why not just if it just adopted the Prometheus ecosystem, these things wouldn't be an issue in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Greg, same question. What's on your wish list?
So, I mean, yeah, I would just like it to mature a bit more. So some of these things we've been talking about where you expect something to work, like retry to work, or delta to cumulative to be there, or, you know, just there not be like these bugs. These things will be fixed in the future, right? So I'm looking forward to that time when the sort of pace of change slows down, it gets a bit more mature, a bit more sort of battle tested. And as Joel was saying, you know, you can read the docs, see there's a feature, and tell your user, yeah, this is probably going to work, rather than always having to like, actually, until we've got it working, I'm not going to tell anybody because it might be a nasty surprise. And then 2 specific features I would like to see. I'd like to see an integration point, extension point for the exporters so we can have a dead letter queue. I'd like to be able to, like, if something is a permanent error trying to export a span, let's say, then be able to send that to another pipeline and go write that to S3 or something, right? So that I can actually see what went wrong with that. We get some errors with like trace too long when we're sending to Grafana, and we don't know which traces they are. There's no way of finding out. So that would be nice. And also we use like the load balancer. And as I said, we had an extension for ECS, Cloud Map. So I had this anxiety that I'm sure at some point when we scale in and out and that consistent list of routing targets changes, then when we were sending a trace to one target, we're now sending it to another target, and we're going to get a split trace. And that tail sampler that's running downstream is there's going to be 2 different nodes, both processing half. So I would like to see some sort of solution to that. I don't know what that solution would, if it's like caching the target or writing to it until you get like a refused or something. I'm sure there's some technical solution, but I don't actually know if that is a big problem because we don't have any way of measuring that. There's not an explicit error there. We've thought about maybe having some sort of synthetics where we're sending like a steady straight of traces and seeing how many have actually arrived downstream, but we don't have way of measuring that. I don't know if it's a big problem, but I worry about it. So I would like to see that solved. That's it.
All right. And Joel.
Yeah, I think I can actually echo a lot of this. One thing where I would really look forward to would be a Prometheus remote write receiver. I know this is actually, I'm not sure what the current status is. I know it was worked on about a year ago or so, and then I think the project kind of lost steam a bit.
As far as I can tell, nobody's working on it. I participate in the Prometheus working group, and it was brought up as one of the things that would be nice for somebody to get to. It's in my to-do list, but it's deep in there.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's exactly like Greg said. This is something which I was just when you discover the project, you kind of assume for sure you could remote write to Prometheus. Now, of course, the technical specifics of why you cannot are, let's say, beyond me at the moment. Maybe one day I will be able to understand, and I'd love to understand. But yeah, this would be a very big feature that would be on my wish list if I could have it tomorrow. Just in terms of sort of my goals in our team, for unifying our telemetry, this would be the sort of the golden ticket, if you like. Yeah, I had another point, but I think I've forgotten it. Yeah, and again, sort of maybe a general connector, again on the metrics topic, so a general connector with which you could take sort of any telemetry and build metrics within the collector. I think this is let's say a gap in the market, and we're currently working internally on just the logs part of that. So maybe in the future we can sort of bring that to the community and contribute it and expand it to other sources of telemetry. But that's for sure. It's those would be top of my wish list.
Awesome, thanks. I did have a final question for everyone, because I think, especially as we see OpenTelemetry pick up more in the community, I want to talk just very briefly in the 8 minutes that we have about scaling the collector. Any like feedback, pain points around scaling the collector, starting with Eales?
So far about scaling, we have used at my current company, because we are using for traces, we're using just normal horizontal pod autoscaler. It works great. In the past, we were also after KEDA, and I remember we even opened an issue in the OpenTelemetry. My colleague opened an issue to support it on the original shard, but I don't think it is supported right now, but we did do it out of the box for our own application, and that worked very well for us, especially considering that HPA works because most of the queue is memory based, but yeah, using KEDA based on the queue size was a great move for us to do the auto scaling. But yeah, even the HPA works great depending on the load that you have.
All right, thanks, Juraj.
For all the deployments, we were using HPA, also just based on memory and CPU. That worked very nicely, I think. And then for the daemons that we were looking at doing VPA, just because they're like, yeah, if you have a single node with bit higher load, you need to bump the resources, and there's nothing you can do about that.
All right, great. And Greg.
So we're kind of like quite relatively early in our journey still with this, and we're at the moment happier to spend money than to lose data. So we've got like quite a, what's the word, conservative, we over provisioned basically, and we've got a simple auto scaling policy based on memory, because the biggest thing is the tail sampler, which uses all the memory. We do scale out quite far and then back down again, especially in our load test environment, obviously. So like that goes to almost nothing overnight, and then during the load test we get like 30, 40 instances sometimes. But we haven't put a lot of effort into trying to like actually optimize that, because we're much more worried about making sure that we've got we're properly processing all that data. And because we're not sure what we're supposed to be monitoring, we're kind of very nervous about changing anything, right? But we're in AWS, so I would like to see exporting the system metrics that we've got, the internal metrics, to you can write them to CloudWatch logs and then turn them into metrics somehow. It's called EMF or something, because you need the metrics to be within CloudWatch so that you can hit the AWS autoscaler. So we can't use any Prometheus metrics, which is what we're normally doing. So there's quite a lot of stuff in my head that we could do there that I'm interested to look at. But apart from like getting it working on my machine, I haven't had anything deployed, anything actually running. But yeah, that's because we've been a bit burnt by losing data, so we're just like very cautious about that at the moment.
Fair enough. And finally, Joel.
Yeah. So essentially, we run everything on one cluster per environment, and these are all deployments. And we found that just HPA with the memory limiter processor has been no problems at all. I think it's even just the out-the-box config for the processor. I've never seen a collector actually, which I find quite impressive. Yeah, that seems to work very, very nicely. Actually, I need to talk to Juraj after this call, because I was suspicious of gRPC on Kubernetes, because I have run into the issue where pods will scale out or deployment will scale out, but some of those pods just don't receive any telemetry. And we are using gRPC on Kubernetes. So that sounds like an issue I need to dig into, definitely.
If you can find me on the CNCF Slack, and if you ping me there, I can send you the link for the, I don't know if there's an open issue about it, but I discussed it already with another person. I can send you the link for the thread.
Yeah, that's great, thanks. So that's something very useful I take away from this panel, at least. Thanks for that.
Can I mention, you mentioned there, or somebody mentioned the memory limiter. So I was enthusiastic to my team. Another one of these things where like I've read the docs and I tell everybody, let's just do this. Like the memory limiter there, it's going to give you transient errors, right? If you get near when you're scaling out, it's fine because the client will just retry, right? And then the fact that retries don't work, we started losing this telemetry. So that was a scaling problem. So now we never hit the memory limiter. We always scale well before we're going to get anywhere near that, because it basically doesn't work, right? I mean, it's going to stop it out of memory, but it's not going to, the client isn't going to retry and resend that span. And that's a much bigger problem for us than spending money on memory.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Well, I guess we are at time. We've got two minutes before we wrap up. So thank you to all of our panelists for showing up today and sharing their thoughts on the OTel collector and how you use it out in the wild. This is super valuable. And thank you everyone else who joined to give this a listen. We definitely really appreciate it. Tell your friends who were not able to make it today that we will have this recording up on the OTel YouTube channel. Our channel, in case you're not aware, it's called OTel-Official. Also, for anyone who is going to be at KubeCon in Paris next month, a number of us from the OTel End User Working Group will be there, including Reese, Dan, Hope, and Rin. I don't think Rin is on this call, and I will be there as well. We're going to be hanging out in the OTel Observatory, which, if you were at KubeCon North America in last fall, it was the happening place for all things OTel, and we've got a lot of cool things lined up at the OTel Observatory. We're actually going to be doing some more user feedback sessions. We're going to be recording Humans of OTel. There are going to be SIG meetings. OTel demos are going to be running. So we're going to have signups also for some of these things. So if you want to participate in another feedback session for another SIG, or if you want to be interviewed for Humans of OTel, we'll have the schedule posted up. I think there's a blog post on the OTel blog that just came out with the sign up links for various things. Now our feedback sessions are still TBD, but keep an eye out for that post in the OTel blog as we finalize the details. So yeah, hope to see a number of you in Paris, and thank you so much for joining us here today. Appreciate everyone taking the time today.
Yes, thank you so much. And we will see you on the Slack.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.